Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So let's get started with this one. I don't think Necropolis is a bad league, but I don't think it's very good. As a more casual streamer and content creator, I guess my take might be a little different than others because, like everyone else, I have limited time to consume PoE content. So I guess the following list I'm going to put together of my grievances, or what I would like to call as PIOs, or otherwise known as performance improvement observations, are things that I think could be improved in the game for all, be it for both hardcore players and more intermediate players alike. And especially there needs to be a little of a bit more attention paid to those more casual players and players that don't have as much time as, i.e., streamers and content creators, because I think that's currently where the game is really missing the mark on more ways than one. Anyway, let's get started. Also, if you do like this type of content, don't forget to like the video, sub to the channel, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. But as always, keep it respectful and productive. Okay, so I guess starting with the elephant in the room, we're down in player numbers. 62.87% has been the drop in the last 30 days, and we're at a current player average of 8,200 players, right? That's still a lot of players. That's not a small number of players, but it's not like Diablo number of players, which is problematic. Would be great to have more players, but if we start to have a look at the metrics, the statistics start to get a bit weird and wacky, in particular around when they release the leagues now. So they have like a cutoff period league release between March and April, which distorted the numbers between the 2 months with the highest player bases between the months. And the highest average player count was obviously in April at 52,000. And maybe we should look at player count as a sort of estimate. And then we go to, the last 30 days, which is 19.5 thousand. What's actually sort of happening here based on the trend is, so if we compare back to the December league as a great metric here, because it was a pretty consistent league, we can see we didn't have as high a player count from the onset of the league, but the higher average players was around 60.2 thousand, with the next month being 46.8 thousand. Now, in the peak of the 3.24 league, we had a player base average of about 52.6 thousand, and we've dropped down to 19.5 thousand, which is less than 50% of the second month in the previous league, which is problematic going into a third month. And usually the player base sits on an average of somewhere around 19,000 to 17,000. We see this in October and November last year. We went between 23,000 to 13,000. So it sort of seats between that 20,000 to, between that 10 to 20,000 mark, or anywhere in between. And the same in June and July last year, 16,000 and 13,000 in the third and fourth month. And also comparably in the same sort of league cycle, I guess, we had 14,000 and 21,000 in February and March last year. So we're not moving in a direction that's really bad compared to past leagues. It just looks like that the player numbers are still fairly stable as an overall. So I know there's a lot of videos ticking around about, the player numbers are drastically dropping off, but realistically the player numbers look about the same at a gut feel level than what they always have been, and that's based on the metrics in front of us. And we can do a deeper dive into the statistics here, but realistically, okay, it's not looking fantastic, but it's also about where it would normally sit. And it's not the first time we've had percentage drops of, 60%. We had a 60% player drop off in October 2022. And then, player drop offs in March 2022, 56%, 53% month on month. So it's not unusual for it to drop off. The highest being June 2021, 66.39%. I'm not too sure what league that was. So the percentage drop off, yep, the players are dropping off. And the problem with the stats is it's split over 3 months, and we had weird and wacky timing where the peak players hit higher in March, and then that sort of dragged into April, and now the player base is sort of diminishing off on the third month, which is about normal for leagues. The problem being leagues are now going for 4 months instead of the original 3-month cycle, and 4 months seems to be the new norm. which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It gives you an opportunity to play other games in that last month. And obviously, there's still tons of streamers, including myself, that stream Delve and things like that. A lot of the more hardcore veteran players play for the longer duration because it's not the flavor of the month, and the streamers are chasing that flavor of the month, whereas the consistent players will continue to stream. And there's a huge player base that does that every single league. And then obvious other things, we've had the Diablo 4 recent patch come out, so players have diverted over to that. We've had No Rest for the Wicked come out. Different things like that have also impacted player numbers. Elden Ring, people are winding up. Fallout are keen on Fallout RPGs, especially after the TV series. So there's always a number of things that impact the player base. It's not as straightforward as the players are dropping off because the league is absolutely terrible. The league's not great. It's not helping the player base numbers, but it's not by any measure killing the game off. The game is just the league cycle is in its native progressive period. When you start to look at the numbers, it's like, okay, this is about average of what it would normally do at this point anyway. So it's not really anything I'd say to be concerned about overall. Okay, so I found this post on the forums, and this was the thread name, T17 maps are not fun. And I agree with everything that's being said in this post. So basically, the maps would be fine if you didn't have ridiculous modifiers that you can't disable or get rid of. Haunted being one example here. Sometimes it's Shaped, sometimes it's Maven. They're just excessively overpowered to the point where if your build's not geared against that, and you're already mitigating 95% of everything else, you're just going to get one-shotted and just makes the game unfun to play. Half the mods on the maps, when stacked together, absolutely brick entire builds in the game. Even if they were balanced for it, it wouldn't matter. There are so many ridiculous mods that do roll on these maps. They just destroy characters. And one of the biggest issues with the game is, even in doing T16s and things like that, the amount of modifiers that you now have to counter within the game are just absolutely absurd. Like, they went on this sort of rampage with, I guess, ailments for a very long time, to the point where you're playing piano keys on your flask, to the point where you needed an entire item being Mage Blood, which is what I call a build fixer, to get most builds up to that high-end gameplay. And then sort of taking that further and then basically, designing a map system that bricks entire builds, makes it extremely difficult to counter within the map, and or there is no counter for certain modifiers on the maps. Or you get every other modifier perfectly fine, but there's one that bricks your build entirely. Or you can't just run magic versions of the maps, like elevated monsters with magic versions would make more sense. But you can't do that because they have to be chaos spammed in order to, push them up to another set of modifiers. There's just too many things about T17 maps that make them unfun. The other big thing about mapping, and in particular if you're a mapper and that's your thing, you want to be able to control how your map plays and the types of attributes and modifiers at a more detailed level on your map based on the character that you're playing. T17s don't let you do this. They're just an unfun squabble of, face melting damage thrown at you with very minimal possibility for any player that hasn't sunk anywhere under a 150 div into their build or up to a mirror to be able to consistently farm T17s. T17s are strictly not made for any sort of intermediate player or below. That's another big problem. A lot of the players looking at the content that streamers are playing, they want to play that content, but they're realistically never going to be able to because it's gated behind, a combination of time that you need to play the game and currency, and not every player in the game, and when I say not every player, a large number of players don't have either the skill set or the time to achieve either or, and so T17s completely gate an entire player base out of playing that content. And some people just don't have more than maybe 1 hour a day, or even if that, maybe every couple days they only have a couple hours. Should those people be excluded from being able to play content in the end game? I don't think that's fair. That also being said, the cost of T17 maps, the drop rates, don't make them efficient to run unless you're a high octane market flipper or somebody who just knows how to print currency. So that also limits the ability of a number of players to be able to access T17 maps. And on top of that, T17 maps currently gate Uber engagements, which has made Uber engagements significantly more unsustainable for people who want to farm Ubers, as opposed to what you previously used to be able to do, which is simply tick it in on your Atlas map, your map Atlas, sorry. You can't do that anymore. You have to farm fragments for access to Ubers, which is just another level of frustration for those who want to Uber farm, as they might have done in previous leagues to make currency. It's also driven the price of Uber drops up because there's simply just less people doing it. It's just less appealing because of the rigmarole and being able to put together the fragments to be able to farm Ubers. It's sort of like, why would you waste your time anymore, and you just walk off and not worry about it? And a lot of those players are probably moving out of the game and not wanting to go as far as that, because it's just more effort to be able to do something that was really quite simple previously. There's some simple fixes for T17s. The way that I see it would be to allow for magic versions of the maps to be rolled. So similar to any other map, you could run a magic version. You wouldn't have to run a rare version. So less modifiers, more accessibility, less difficulty, creates more openness to, I guess, lesser geared up characters as well. The next point would be decrease the chance for probabilities of higher tier modifiers that would have negative impacts to roll together on the same map. So don't allow certain modifiers to have such a high probability to roll unanimously on the same map at the same time. So you've got a better probability of getting a more favorable balanced spread of mods across the map. Increase the drop rate of the maps as an overall, so that you've got more accessibility to T17 maps. This will take them down from 70 to 80 chaos a map to maybe like 20 to 30 chaos a map. You know, it wouldn't be a huge ask to do that. This will make it a lot more accessible for players to farm in the end game. And then also drop the overall difficulty of the maps where possible as well. But reducing the cost to run the maps would allow alleviation to the Uber issue, and would also reduce the cost of Uber uniques, which would make a lot more builds more accessible to a lot more players, and probably alleviate a lot of the concerns around T17 maps and make them feel more native to the map progression process. So in respect to the league mechanic, like the comments that keep coming up in streams and that I keep reading and or keep seeing videos around is it's high grind for relatively moderate rewards, or it's like 2 hours of grinding or 15 hours of grinding for 10 seconds of endorphin hit. It's quite unengaging, and this isn't uncommon for crafting leagues. Crafting leagues have notoriously always been very similar in nature, whether it be the Harvest League, whether it be going back to Synthesis League or everything else in between. Though Synthesis League was quite good as far as the creativeness of the mechanic, the league itself just wasn't very good. And that's what this league is sort of falling into the category of. And generally, leagues where there's a lot of micromanagement of mechanics, and this, I think back to Harvest League, was how I felt, even though Harvest League was widely accepted as a great league from the outputs from the actual Harvest mechanic as a crafting mechanic. The actual league itself, the content in the league itself, wasn't very engaging as far as, or maybe the right word is, it was engaging if you had a proclivity to want to micromanage, you know, a garden, and micromanage, in this case, a cemetery. But realistically, it doesn't appeal to the vast amount of players, and there's not a lot of purpose of playing the league mechanic in that respect, because there's no outcome from the league mechanic. There's no new boss, there's no new real encounter, there's nothing really interesting that catches the player's attention. The way that I would look at this league, more or less, is it's a filler league. We're basically playing a league that's in between league, where there weren't any major ideas around what could be a league mechanic, because there's a big league mechanic coming in the next league or the following league beyond that, or potentially more announcements for PoE 2. So this league sort of felt like it was a buying time sort of league, in my own opinion. Some people might not agree. Some people do like the league, and more power to them. For me, personally, I just avoid the league mechanic. I don't find it engaging. I don't find it fun. For me, Delve is where it's at. Obviously, I'm a Delve player. But for any character, or sorry, any player that does have a very specific piece of content, they're basically just gravitating towards that content. This isn't really drawing them out. Some other major issues with the league also go as far as forced encounters within each actual area you go to, which is creating modifiers and maps that were just untenable. At the very start of the league, this was actually causing major issues where they had to release patches and hotfixes to be able to deal with this early on. I.e., mechanics that were bricking maps and destroying players and whatnot is never fun. Nobody wants to run a new character and absolutely get face melted. The other thing is through the campaign, it also created early issues with the league start as well. So there's a lot of issues with putting forced mechanics in PoE. A lot of people really don't like it because it doesn't let you have any options or choices around what you will get when you play different mechanics. Like we talk about Archnem last league, sorry, not Archnem, but the last league. Basically, you could choose whether or not you wanted to go and encounter wisps or whatnot. It was always an option in every map you go to. If you didn't want to play the mechanic, you didn't have to play the mechanic. If you did want to play the mechanic, you could play the mechanic, and then you could also go and unlock the Taken King after so many encounters, and it was a really cool fight that was sort of hidden in the mist and whatnot. And that's a really cool mechanic. The same with things like, Breach League. All these leagues had like an outcome from doing the mechanics. This particular league in Necropolis doesn't. There's no sort of cool outcome of the league where, you're going to get a really cool encounter or whatnot. And if there is, it's heavily catered behind running map after map after map after map and collecting corpses. And then, if you do want to craft with it, it's a tedious, meticulous task that only people who really want to do that will do. The other problem with the league is All Flames. So in particular, we talk about Delve and the interaction with Azurite gain. That wasn't patched for 2 weeks and it completely bricked the resonator market, which for a lot of players destroyed their ability to make currency. Whether or not you agree with that or if you care is an entirely separate conversation. But certain things like that and fallouts from the league mechanic have adversely affected even Harvest Juice collection and market sales and things like that. And maybe that was intended, maybe that was unintended, but it seems like this league was like dump it into the fray just to get a league out there without really thinking about the consequences of some of the game design elements that came from the league, in particular the impacts of All Flames on different mechanics and or on mechanics that may not have been directly related to certain mechanics or interactions within other parts of the game that were just not really considered in the, QA process for this league. That being said, it's not the worst league mechanic, I think. It's just nowhere near the best. It's very mid, if at that. It's just a filler league is the opinion I have of this league overall. One of the things I really like about league starts, in particular league planning, is the ability to theorycraft. And for many leagues, we used to get a lot of new skills hinted, which meant we had new mechanics and new ways to play. Ever since Transfiguration Gems, this has sort of changed, and not in a great way, and I'll elaborate on that, but maybe controversial opinion, I don't like Transfigured Gems. I think they are I don't want to say the word lazy, but they are not a very creative way to introduce new skills into the game, but let me explain why. So, feeding into my comments about Transfiguration Gems, number one, right, there are certain gems that, and I've tested a lot of different gems over trying to figure out different builds and trying to make things work. Some gems just straight up are not good. Give you an example, Divine Ire of Holy Lightning, right? So basically, the way that many of the Transfiguration gems actually work is they take the base skill and they simply split it into 3. And the problem with that, and then all they do is adjust percentages. So the problem that I see with that approach is you're not really introducing many new mechanics into the game, and it sort of feels like, hey guys, we need to come up with some skills. Let's just take one gem that already exists in the game that had a few different parts to it, and let's just split it into 3 and simplify it down, put in some buff stats, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work. Divine Ire of Holy Lightning is a great example. So last league I ran Divine Ire. It works. As a skill, it works. So the notion is you charge it up, does AoE damage, you release it, does a single bolt of damage. So they had 2 variants of this. They had Holy Lightning. There was another variant outside of that as well. Holy Lightning is where it just does the AoE charge up. Now, as you can see, not a great deal of players that are playing it. The same goes with Incinerate of Expanse. This is where it 2 months into the league, we go, say, 4 weeks into the league, you will see basically 3 players. The skill doesn't scale very well. It's not well constructed, and when I ran it through to try and test the numbers on it, it doesn't stack up. And like, so your solutions for a lot of builds now are running Adorn setups, and in particular melee builds, and a lot of builds are running Adorn, and it's most likely going to be the case where they're going to nerf Adorn next league, because quite frankly, it's one of the most powerful ways to make bad skills or underscaled skills scale up quicker, because you multiply up to 150% depending on how much you want to put into it to be able to amp up your skill density. If you want to talk about damage or crit stats or whatever, it's a really easy way to get a skill that is bad and get it to actually be not so bad. Basically an easy way to get underperforming skills to move up to a current iteration of standard with skills. Galvanic Arrow of Surging, 1 player at the current point, and the DPS stat, void of whether or not that's the accurate stat, doesn't look too appealing. Shrapnel Ballista, again, 1 player. Skeleton Archers, deceptively, I tried this last league and I never put a video up about it, and I tried to stack poison because theoretically it should stack a lot of poison, right? Absolutely horrible to scale. Felt bad, scrapped the build, wasn't worth the time. Arguably, like, the investment to get these up and going, from what I can see, it's not too much based on this, but again, I say that, and voices, and lo and behold, Adorned almost every single time. And we come to like the skills that are really good. For example, Ice Nova of Frostbolts was really popular this league. Detonate Dead, obviously, of Chaining with the Cast on Crit version that was put out by Ru2 and his crew. There are some other skill. Holy Relic was also another good hit this league, but it feels like these transgems are just like a blanket hit and miss. They're not really putting a lot of effort into developing new skills. Not like, when we had, for example, Volcanic Fissure, and you could run Volcanic Fissure totems and things like that. And it was really exciting to come up with new builds for that sort of skill, because it was interesting. But this is my opinion. Like, Penance Brand of Dissipation was added into the game, and, essentially we got, 2% of players now playing it overall. It was just nerfed because it was a hit that hit too hard. And so basically, they course correct and go, oh, next league, we're just going to obliterate that skill. Now, the other things are like, they took away cardinal skills. The biggest complaint from a lot of players currently is, why nerf RF? Why nerf Vortex? Like, I understand the direction that I guess the developers want to go in is to have it so you have to click a lot of buttons, but what about people who don't want to do that? Like, why do we nerf those skills at all? Like, they were pretty mid, to be honest with you. They were just widely played because they were easily accessible. And I understand the change of, needing to change the meta, but at the same time, if all the skills were equally balanced at a reasonable level and reasonably accessible, then a lot more people would be playing different skills, and there would be a much bigger list of meta skills when you go to each league. That seems to just be not the solution here. The other thing is, I guess, the age-old question of, when are they going to fix melee? You look at melee trans gems. I don't even know what the point of putting transfigured melee gems in the game is right now, because melee is essentially not workable. And the solution surely can't be, you're going to have to wait until PoE 2 because we fixed melee there. So are we going to get a change in PoE 1 for melee, or are we just going to forget that melee exists? Because for many of the boss fights in the current iteration of what they are, melee just doesn't stack up. And the consensus across the player base is that just melee isn't good unless you're playing something like Bone Shatter or Lightning Strike, which are just the standard metas, or Molten Strike, and then you're running an Armor Stacker, which is a mirror tier build going in the Depth Delve, or running high-end content, which isn't really accessible to the average player base for the best of it. Your other alternatives for the most are Spellcasters, or in this case, Lightning Arrow builds, as you can see here, the occasional Scourge Arrow build, so on, or the age-old explosive arrow ballistas and whatnot. So, like, I just have a lot of issues with the design choices around transgems. At some point in the past, or for much of the past of the game, new skills were actual new skills, and it was really exciting. Now, we did get automation, we did get call to arms, and arguably I like both of them. I think they're actually really good, and they're way better than the old iteration of, the mouse click. But taking mouse click from NB1 or left mouse click out of the game and compensating for that just seems like, what are they really concerned about the impact of that? Like, what does that degrade? I don't see what the point of that is, and maybe I just don't know enough. But critically, I just don't see where the huge advantage would be seen from that, or where the power spike could be. Things like focus, which I used on a lot of my builds, you can't actually use an item that has focus and put automation into it because it's not an instacast skill apparently. So focus is essentially bricked. You can't automate focus at all, and there's other things like that you can't automate at all that once you could automate with MB left mouse click. So like, that doesn't make a lot of sense, and it feels like they sort of reacted very quickly to try and address a problem that didn't really need to be addressed. And the other problem is the duress it puts into your item sockets as well, which, we worked around, but again, it's just like cluttering up builds and making them more tedious and complex to balance, when arguably PoE is already the most complex ARPG out there. Just, these are some of the gripes and things that I think about when I'm putting together builds or testing builds and things like that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one with this comment, but I just think, what is wrong with going back to actually putting new and exciting, interesting, and balanced skills into the game? And for Melee, it's quite simple. Just put a debuff on it and, pair it up with, give players a damage debuff. If casters can sit away from an enemy, then give us the ability to have a debuff that allows us to get closer to an enemy, for example, and increase the level of defenses. The other thing is DPS, like the stat just needs to be risen. These are some suggestions that I've got based on just, playing so many different builds and so many different variations of builds and whatnot across the years. And after 8-9 years of playing PoE and thousands upon thousands of hours, we've sort of gotten to a state where we're just sort of rehashing the same skills and reskinning them. And that's what it feels like here. And again, it's a time buy until PoE 2. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of innovation going into the way that skills are being designed. But again, my opinion, it's not something that everybody will share, but it's the way that I feel about when I see Transfigured gems. I just don't get the same level of excitement from Transfigured gems as what I once did, and I think that's also something that's playing into why people are less interested later in the game, because there's no cool and interesting skill that they want to try out that they've never seen before, or even a variation before. It's just like, that's the way that new skills feel. It's like, whoa, this is wild, like, holy damn, this is crazy, like, this has got some cool interactions and you can play it in multiple different ways. You can't really do that with, like, you can do that with trans gems, but it's just not the same feel as an overall new skill. Anyway, that's my last point that I've got around some of the criticisms I've got. And I'm trying to be really constructive about this too, and not destructive. I just don't think it's worth slamming the game. It's still the best ARPG out there, hands down. But anyway, that's my 10 cents worth. Anyway, I hope this video sort of, I don't know, I felt like just expressing myself around, I guess, what I think are some of the reasons the game's starting to drop off a bit much earlier than what we would normally intend for it to drop off for. The other thing is, obviously, 4-month league, a bit of a summary. Transgems definitely are making it easy, because at the end of the day, there's no new skills that people want to test out later in the league anymore. Not like there used to be. That was one of the fun parts of playing the game. Obviously, other things that are battering the hatches, some of the mechanic choices for the league mechanic itself is just not, it's just not creating longevity in the leagues. This is very similar to, like, Crucible League was very similar to this as well, just as a comment. But as an overall, like, do I still love the game? Absolutely. I think it's amazing. It's always amazing. I'm still playing it. I still think the league is fun. And I think that's what it comes back to, is while you might see videos like this where there are negative points raised, and other videos that might be out there, I think the game as a foundational game and its foundational mechanics is still a fantastic game. And, it's better than other games that won't be named that have recently been patched with Loot 2.0 and are basically putting in the same content they did when they put it into their last game. But we won't talk about that game. But anyway, if this video sort of caught your attention and sort of gave you some other things to mull over around maybe the reasons why you're not finding the league as engaging as past leagues, don't forget to drop a like. Don't forget to drop a sub to the channel. And until next time, I'll leave you guys to it. I've got some tier lists I'm going to work on too for other ARPGs. I obviously play other things off stream. And anyway, either way, I'm still delving and pushing past 1,000 with totems because I can. So if you're around on Twitch, make sure you jump in and say hey. Anyway, I'll see you guys later and have a good one.